Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with Grammy-nominated producer, music industry veteran, educator, and jazz musician Nick Phillips. Over his career, he has worked on several hundred commercially released projects. Newly recorded projects produced by Nick include albums by jazz luminaries like Kenny Barron, Randy Brecker, Fred Hersch, and so many others. We cover new projects, his albums as a trumpeter, consulting, education, and so much more. He's a fascinating cat with many stories. Enjoy this interview.
Great to meet you, man. Thanks for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many things that go into what you do and who you are. And before we start digging beneath the layers, looking at the calendar right now for a lot of people is PTSD because it's March. 3 years ago, everything stopped. So I'm curious, in your capacity in music, and all the things that you do, how did you survive the COVID period now that we're waking up and things are happening? And how has it changed the way that you approach life and business now?
Well, that's a good question. Fortunately, before COVID hit, I was already working from home in a home office, so I was very used to that. I had been, since I think 2016, working as an independent producer and jazz consultant. So in that regard, things didn't really change much for me. I had been working as a producer and consultant for craft recordings, and which I'm continuing to do, working on all these great jazz box sets. At the time, I was also the jazz music editor of digital programming at iHeartRadio, which was also a work from home situation. Where it most impacted me was as a jazz trumpet player. I was performing pretty regularly, leading my own group in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. And when COVID hit, that just completely went away. And I feel like I'm still struggling to get that that aspect of my music persona back in action. I'm mostly these days just focused on practicing the trumpet in the woodshed, but I haven't led a group since COVID hit.
What's been going on with you lately? What's going on now as we're in a new year and things are opening up? What kinds of things are happening?
Well, I'm doing a lot of work for Craft Recordings, producing a number of box sets for them, including this Birth of Bop set. That was the impetus, I think, for setting up this call. But a number of projects I worked on as a compilation reissue producer, including 3LP Deluxe Expanded Edition of Vince Guaraldi's Jazz Impressions of Black Orpheus. That features 2 whole LPs of alternate takes, and working on a Sonny Rollins 3LP set that will be coming out in June. Worked on the Eddie Lockjaw Davis box set featuring Shirley Scott, Cooking with Jaws and the Queen. That just came out this month. And a lot of other things in the works for this year, next year, and even into 2025 for craft recordings. I'm also working as an artist coach, and I've been working with jazz vocal artist Nina Freelon in that capacity, as well as Emily Claire Barlow. So yeah, I'm still keeping busy in jazz. I'm managing to thread together a bunch of different things, but the thread that actually runs through all of it is the jazz genre, jazz music.
So let's go back to the beginnings for you. Talk to me a little bit about where you were born and raised and how this journey and love for jazz started for you.
Oh, wow, that's a good question. So I was born in Southern California in La Mesa, a town that's near San Diego, but I've lived most of my life in Northern California. As a young child, my parents moved up to Northern California, and I grew up in the wine country, Sonoma Valley. My interest in jazz first was piqued when I was in elementary school, and the high school jazz band came by and played a concert for us. And that was when I was in the fourth grade. And I was just blown away by the power and the excitement of a big band playing jazz. And the following year, we were given the opportunity to study music and pick an instrument, and I chose trumpet, and I've been studying and trying to play that instrument ever since.
So I'm curious, the one thing that hooks us into anything is what we can experience live, and we've experienced that absence of community for a while now. What was the very first live jazz show that you ever saw that blew you away?
Oh, well, I would have to say I consider this guy to be a gateway artist, if you will. When I was in junior high school, I went to a Chuck Mangione concert at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. And he had that crossover hit, Feels So Good. So that, being a young kid, that really appealed to me to hear somebody playing the flugelhorn, an instrument very similar to the trumpet, on pop radio. And the concert really blew me away. And I think part of the reason it blew me away was because he had a full orchestra performing with him. He had a brass section with French horns and trumpets and trombones, and he had strings, performing with an orchestra. So it had trumpets and trombones and French horns, a full brass section and strings, and hearing music orchestrated like that live was really powerful and made a real big impression on me.
So talk to me a little bit about your journey into all of these things that you do now. What was kind of the first gig for you, and how did things kind of start taking off and you knew that this was going to be your life?
Well, I knew that I was going to have a career in music, and one ideally that had a focus on jazz, when I was a senior in high school and trying to figure out what I wanted to study in college. And so I was a music major at University of the Pacific, but I was in their music business program, which was one of the few schools in the country that had a music business program at the time. And so I focused on trying to land a career in the music business, and actually right out of college I landed with a little mom and pop jazz label called Concord Jazz, which was still based in Concord, California, and was still being run by the original owner and founder of the company, Carl Jefferson. So in September of 1987, I started working for Concord Jazz, and that company grew quite a lot after it was sold to Alliance Entertainment Corporation, which was a distribution company, and the person that brokered that deal on behalf of Alliance was Glenn Barros, who became president and CEO of Concord after Carl Jefferson died. And in the early 2000s, there was a big spurt of growth by acquisition. Concord purchased Fantasy Records, and all of the labels that they had acquired over the years, including Prestige, Riverside, and Pablo, and Contemporary, and Milestone, and Stax. So while I was doing compilation producing and reissue producing for Concord prior to that, that really became a majority of my focus after Concord acquired Fantasy.
So in all of these things that you juggle and do, what is it that you like the best about your existence in music? What's the best part of it?
I think for me, there are so many satisfying parts of what I do, and I think the fact that the jazz genre is the thread that runs through it all, and I'm so passionate about the genre, that it makes all these different things I do very rewarding. I absolutely love digging into the classic recordings of such artists as Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk and Sonny Rollins and on and on and on, Bill Evans, and coming up with creative ways to, represent their music to the public.
If you could get into a jazz DeLorean, so to speak, and go back in time and see any musician in the realm of jazz anywhere, where are you going? Who are you going to see?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. It would have to be going back to see one of Miles Davis's groups. Either the group he had when he was recording for Prestige with John Coltrane and Red Garland and Philly Joe Jones and Paul Chambers, or the group he had in the '60s with Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock. I mean, it'd have to be one of those.
Yeah. So you've got Grammys, Grammy nominations. There's all kinds of accolades that you've gotten over time, and you've worked with some really big names in jazz. What have you learned from the legends and luminaries that you've been around in the world of jazz? What have they taught you about this craft and about being in it?
Well, one thing, being a musician myself, I've had to learn to not try to compare my own music to greats such as Miles Davis and Chet Baker, but rather be inspired by it, because you're never going to reach that level, but it's always great to have the inspiration and the goals that are always out of reach. I don't know, there's so much great music in all the different eras of jazz, and I feel like it's a lifelong pursuit. This is something I realized many years ago, that I can continue to study jazz improvisation. I can continue to study jazz history, and I'll never know it all. And it'll be one of these great lifelong pursuits.
So ultimately, at the end of the day, why do you love jazz?
I think one of the main things about it is that the in-the-moment creativity that happens with jazz improvisation, and not just jazz improvisation in terms of a soloist with rhythm section accompaniment, but the kind of interactive performance that happens with jazz musicians, at every part of a live or recorded performance. All these in-the-moment things that happen that just don't quite happen in the same way in other genres.
Every time I have these interviews and talk about projects that are happening, it's almost as though musicians are kind of moving on and thinking into the next thing. And it's a little bit more special now because we're hitting this point where hopefully we're past being locked down and inside of a pandemic. What's your future looking like? What's opening up for live shows and projects and things as we look forward here in 2023?
Well, in terms of live shows and being a fan and going and hearing live music again, I've been enjoying a pretty fair amount of that lately, and it feels really good to get back out there and hear live music again. I just recently heard Terry Lynn Carrington at SF Jazz, and that concert blew me away, and I heard Cecile McLaurin-Salvant out here a little closer to where I currently live at the Mondavi Center for the Arts. And so, it seems to be really happening again. And, I just optimistic that there won't be another wave of something that shuts it all down again, because this period of not being able to go out and hear live music, and all the musicians not being able to go out and play live music, which is such an important part of their livelihood, was a really rough period.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, clients, colleagues, but ultimately you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am? Oh boy. I like to think of myself as a kind and compassionate person. That's at the end of the day, that's what I strive to be. I'm also a creative person, and every day I'm always trying to be creative in whatever it is that I'm doing.
So if anyone out there wants to hire you, get projects you're involved with, anything pertaining to your world, where's the best place to go?
They can always reach out to me via LinkedIn, or also my website is nickphillipsmusic.com, and there's a way to contact me via my website as well.
Wonderful, Nick. Hey, man, thank you for opening up. You're a man of many talents. I appreciate you talking about it, touching on this beautiful world of jazz that we all dig.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it. I thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in California, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Nick for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, you can find Neon Jazz Interviews on Apple Podcast and Spotify. You can also subscribe to us at YouTube. For everything Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.